Hi everybody, Johnny here. I'm going to go through CalTPA Cycle 2, Rubric 2.2. This is still under Step 1 Planning. Let's read the essential question. How does the candidate plan a learning segment in which assessments, instructional strategies, and learning activities align and provide a progression of learning that develops students' concepts and skills to achieve the learning goals? All right, so let's take apart what matters. First piece is alignment. So the assessment, the instructional strategies, and learning activities must all point to, and this is the big idea, they all must point to the learning goals. All right, that's why it's so important to set out really worthwhile learning goals. Then you build everything from that. You build the assessment, you build the instructional strategies and learning activities towards the learning goals. The second thing that matters in this rubric is the progression. So the alignment means point all towards the learning goals. The progression means step by step articulating how you're moving towards those learning goals. So under progression, instruction clearly builds ideas from one lesson to the next to meet the learning goals. Okay, so one's about everything being in line, the other one's about moving purposefully towards. But both of them are concerned with the learning goals. Let's take this apart a bit. I'm going to start with level 3. Level 3 is the first level of assessment you will have. And let's be clear, this is the important part. As I set out all the requirements for level 3, remember, you have to meet all these requirements in order to get this score. So I'm going to deconstruct level 3. You will see that it's in two blocks. There's a block up here of text, and there's a block up here, block down here of text. And each one of them has multiple things going on in it. So I'm going to work with you to deconstruct each one of the blocks and set out the particular learning goals. All right? So let's read this first one here. Candidate uses assessments, including the rubric. Okay, so it's about assessments, including the rubric, instructional activities, and learning activities. You already have three things here: assessments, instructional activities, and learning activities. So remember, you have to address each one of those threes in each lesson of the learning segment that are clearly aligned to support students to meet the learning goals. Okay, so let's take a look at the musts for this one. All right, the first must. First must is about assessments. Your formal, informal, and self-assessment must all point to the learning goals, okay? Set your learning goals first, then build your assessments from these goals, all right? So as I've said, make really strong, clear, worthwhile learning goals, and then build everything from that. So the first requirement is all about assessment. The second one is about instructional strategies, and these need to align with your learning goals again. What are you doing for your students for each learning goal? Describe. So what are you doing for your students' learning? For each learning goal, describe the strategies you will use in your teaching that will ensure student learning for each learning goal. Okay, so my suggestion here is you break down and set out your learning goals, and then you very clearly articulate what the strategies are that fit your teaching strategies, your instructional strategies, what they will do to move students towards that learning goal. All right? The third requirement here is all about learning activities. If instructional activities are about what you're going to be doing, learning activities are about what they're going to be doing, your students are going to be doing. And again, your learning activities must align with your learning goals. Have good learning goals. Okay? So the activities your students are doing for themselves to ensure they're learning and for each learning goal. Okay, so make sure that you set out activities per learning goal in ways that make good sense for your students' own engagement. All right, so let's make sure that we understand that all of these are about alignment. Okay, so you can imagine what the next block of text is going to be about. Let's go back to level 3. Candidates' lessons build on each other, build on one another, to develop students' higher order thinking skills, okay, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, interpretation, transfer, academic language, and concepts and skills that are likely to support students to engage with the learning segment content. Let's take this one apart. Here are the musts. Each lesson builds on prior learning. So that needs to be clearly stated. So if your lesson 2 needs to say, we began by reviewing and reminding ourselves about lesson 1, and from those ideas in lesson 1 we were able to move to lesson 2, and that might be what you articulate to kids at the beginning of your lesson, but it must be clear that one lesson builds on the next lesson, builds on the prior lesson. Now let's go to the next one. The learning segment begins by building on what students know and are able to do from past learning. Okay, so this is a very asset-focused way of considering your instruction. We're working from what our students know and making good use of that. That's a second requirement. The third requirement, every lesson that follows must clearly build on the lesson before. Begin the lesson by reminding students of prior lesson. Okay, and we call that activating prior knowledge. Close every lesson by telling and showing students how that day's learning will set up the next day. Okay, so instead of 3 individual lessons, each lesson should have some particular learning goal or focus, but you need to articulate how each day connects with the prior learning and sets up the following day's learning. Now, this is one of the things that's necessary for level 3. You may do everything about setting out good learning goals, and you may have all those good things about saying what your assessments are, but you have to say something and give good attention to higher order thinking. If you don't do this, then it can't be level 3. So give attention to higher order thinking every lesson. Ask the rich, deep question. Okay? Push them to deeper learning at every lesson. That has to happen. And the last one has to happen as well. You may have great plans, great assessments, but if you don't give attention to academic language, you're going to miss this one, and it's required. Attention to academic language. So make sure you're giving it good attention to the talk, the writing, and terms important to the subject. And name it too. In this lesson, I'm giving attention to academic language in these ways. In this assessment, I'm looking for kids' ability to use this form of academic language. So give attention to academic language across your instructional strategies, your learning activities, and your assessments, right? So same for higher order thinking. How does higher order thinking show up in your assessments? How does higher order thinking show up in your instructional strategies? And how does higher order thinking show up in your learning activities? The tools you're using to measure students' learning, the ways in which you're teaching, and the ways in which students are engaging. And then all of these are all about progression. Okay, let's review. So musts. In the first part, there are 3 particular requirements about assessment, instructional strategies, and learning activities. In the second segment, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 requirements, building on prior learning, okay, building on what they already know, building on what they on their prior knowledge and setting up the next day's lesson, and make sure you give good attention to higher order thinking and to academic language. So all of these are necessary to get you to level 3. Let's take a look at level 4. Sometimes level 4 is just a little bit of a reach. Level 3 is always the one that takes the most work, but once you've done all that work, you might as well try for level 4. Let's take this one apart. All of level 3 plus, candidates' learning segment plan builds in opportunities that provide multiple access points, different ways to learn content visually through writing or reading, listening, acting out, verbalizing, to learning content in multiple modes, different ways for students to show what they know through writing, speaking, performing to demonstrate learning of the content. Okay, so you've both got multiple access points, and you've got multiple modes for them to show what they know. So for level 4, the musts have 2 things going on. The first one is access, multiple ways for students to engage the materials. What you want to do is vary the tools, representations, share more than one model, have students engage and share in the learning in more than one way, independent, pair, or group. So that's about access. For level 4, the second requirement is representation. Sorry about the spelling there. Multiple ways for students to show what they know and are able to do. So this is for them to be able to explain to you, demonstrate to you the ways, what they've learned and what they care about in their learning. All right? Multiple ways for students to show what they know and are able to do, no matter the subject, giving students the opportunity to write, speak about, perform, make a project, and do offer choice. So for level 4, on the second rubric, you've got to do 2 things. Make sure kids have ways to access the materials in more than one way, and make sure that students have ways to represent their understandings in more than one way. And that moves you to a level 4. Now remember, level 3 had many, many, many requirements. Level 4 just has these 2. If we push it even further and take it to level 5, in level 5, all of levels 3 and 4 plus, candidates' learning segment plan is sufficiently flexible to provide for an inclusive learning environment reflective of students' assets and learning needs, where all students clearly have equal access to content by engaging in challenging learning activities, UDL, with multiple means of representation, action, and expression, and engagement that develop, and they always put these 2 here, so you cannot ignore them, academic language and higher order thinking. For you to do level 5, the musts are: make sure there's a variety of opportunities for students to access the content and represent their understandings, clearly show consideration for students' assets, needs, and interests. So level 4 was always about multiple ways for kids to access the content. In this level 5, you're doing this in consideration of who the kids are and what best serves them, what their assets and needs and interests are. The second requirement for level 5, these opportunities are clearly set out to encourage belonging and inclusiveness. And you make clear about that too in your writing. I'm choosing to plan this way because I want to draw more students in, and this form of representation or these choices that I'm offering my students will give them a sense of belonging and know that the learning segment in my teaching is about them and what matters to them. And the last 2, again, attention to academic language, and then attention to higher order thinking. Those have to happen. So for level 5, you need to have 1, 2, 3, 4 requirements. All right? For all of this particular rubric, these are the ways in which you can show your, represent your learning. So sources of evidence. You have the written narrative, who your kids are, your lesson plans to the learning segment, how you describe your assessments, and then blank copy of informal, student self-assessment, formal assessment, and importantly, the rubric. How you describe what counts for students' learning is one of the ways you show what matters. So you can imagine in your rubric you give attention to academic language, you give attention to higher order thinking. So your rubric is another way to show what you care about, so make sure you give good attention to that. So this is all we've got for the second rubric. I'm going to move on to the third one.